All right, we will begin. Welcome, everyone. We are delighted that so many of you could join us. We have donors, we have professional advisors, we have nonprofit leaders with us today. I'm David Kaler, Vice President for Advancement for Madison Community Foundation, where we have the privilege of working with so many of you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for what you do each day to make our community a better place. You give, you work for change, and you support clients as they make a difference through philanthropy, and it's really an honor for us to be your partner. We have a great program ahead. Before we begin, we realize today is Yom Kippur and want to let you know that we'll be more careful about scheduling in the future. A few notes for attorneys licensed in Wisconsin. This webinar is approved for 1 CLE credit if you are participating live. Thanks to those of you who submitted questions in advance. We incorporated most of them into the discussion ahead. If you have questions today, please drop them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. We'll monitor these and address them near the end of the program. After the webinar, we're going to reach out with a brief survey. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future topics. We do 3 to 4 of these a year, and your input is greatly valued. And if you want to continue the conversation that has started today, we are here to serve the community. Please reach out, explore our website, or search our advisor blog for additional resources. Private family foundations are an important tool for philanthropy, yet few endure forever. Families eventually face questions. Should the next generation continue the foundation? Should we spend it down, convert to a donor-advised fund, merge with our favorite cause? These are deeply personal decisions that blend family dynamics, governance challenges, tax considerations, philanthropic values, and estates. Advisors play a key role in guiding clients through these transitions, helping families balance legacy, flexibility, and impact. In today's session, guiding clients through foundation, succession, transition, and sunset, we'll explore the most common succession pathways. You'll hear real stories and insights from donors, practitioners, and advisors who've helped families navigate these crossroads. Our goal is to give you, as donors, information as you may be considering what is the best fit for your goals, and as advisors, tools and insights that you can use to guide clients through these life decisions. We are joined by an exceptional panel with firsthand experience in foundation operations, succession planning, and it includes Lau Bea Christensen, who are longtime lead philanthropists in our community. They recently transitioned their private family foundation to a donor-advised fund at Madison Community Foundation. We couldn't be more humbled, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a kinder couple. Thank you for being here. Rew Barden, shareholder with Reinhart and an attorney specializing in trusts, estates, and family offices. She helps clients balance the legal and emotional dimensions of wealth transfer and philanthropy. Christine is a past chair of our board of governors at Madison Community Foundation. Thank you, Christine, for joining us. Greg Rademacher is an experienced investment advisor. He is partner at Sycamore Investment Consulting and president of Buttonwood Partners, where he guides families through complex financial and charitable planning. Thank you, Greg, for joining us. And E.G. Schramka, who is a lawyer, retired CPA, executive director of the Goodman Foundation, and a current member of MCF's Board of Governors. E.G. also leads our professional advisory council, bringing decades of tax and estate expertise to the table. Thank you, E.G. And welcome, panel. We're so happy that you could all join us and for us to be able to have this conversation with you. We have a lot to cover, so we're going to jump right in. And we're going to set the stage by talking about why families establish private family foundations and what prompts them to start thinking about succession. And then we'll move into the specific options that families can consider. So we're going to start with Greg. I know that you and your firm have helped people create foundations. And so the question is, why would an individual have a private family foundation in the first place?
Thank you, David. And on behalf of the panel, I just want to thank you and MCF for organizing this conversation today. I think the most important part that we can't forget is whether it is a private family foundation or any other strategy, it starts with a desire to have a meaningful charitable impact. And before you can even consider a private family foundation, it needs to be a long-term commitment. So when clients or potential donors are looking at this, you really want to make sure that they have a commitment to building a legacy, thinking about the long term, and especially when it's a private foundation, it is not a short term or a couple of year endeavor. You really are looking at setting something up for the long term. Beyond that, when you look through the toolbox of the different possible approaches for executing that intent, the private foundation, a lot of times you will read is offers more control, but I think in my experience, it is much more about customization. And so private family foundation offers a lot of flexibility to the donors in terms of something specific in terms of their investment approach or how they would like to give the funds over time, or just creating an actual separate independent identity for the foundation. And any of those things are possible through a family foundation.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. Lau and B, your charitable foundation and now fund makes a difference for dozens of nonprofits each year. And I was hoping you would share with us, why did you start your private family foundation? And a follow-up to that would be, what prompted you to begin thinking about a succession plan?
Well, David, thanks so much for including us in this webinar. We're really happy to be here. Interestingly enough, in the first question, what prompted us to start our family foundation? Well, it turns out that our family financial advisors were none other than Greg Rademacher, who just spoke, and his predecessor at Buttonwood Partners, Chris Bogg. And so pretty much Greg has just laid out reasons for starting a family foundation that were persuasive to us. We wanted to be active in philanthropy in our community. And we were in a position, we decided, B and I have been together, we married 16 years ago, and that's when we started our family foundation. We decided we wanted to have an impact in philanthropy in Madison, and that we were in a position to devote half of our income to philanthropy. And that's not a random number. That's a number that is what the tax code allows you to deduct. So by contributing money to the family foundation, basically you're getting a leveraged donation, and part of that money then is allowed to go into the foundation by not having to pay federal and state income taxes on that money, and that was definitely a considerable fact in our deciding to go the foundation route. And we wanted to build the foundation, and we did that aggressively over the years. But we didn't, even though we were willing to devote half our income to philanthropy, didn't feel like we were knowledgeable enough in the field of philanthropy at that point in time to be investing directly in organizations. We wanted to learn more. And so in a way, what the private foundation allowed us to do was to stockpile money added to by the federal and US governments, and had money available as we became more learned in the area of philanthropy, and that has served us very well. In terms of why we decided, or what was the impetus for us to decide to have a succession plan, which was other than simply maintaining the foundation until our demise and letting it go on to the next generation. The impetus was that we have been very active in Operation Fresh Start, and they were in the process of developing a planned giving program, like many nonprofits do. And we contacted David Kaler, who also happens to be on this webinar, and said, could some of us from Operation Fresh Start meet with you and learn about planned giving and how might that work? And We had an excellent meeting with David, and he helped set up a planned giving program for Operation Fresh Start. But it really got us thinking about, do we want to do something other than simply view our foundation as something that when we're gone, we'll move on to the next generation and go from there. And after considerable consideration, we decided that the next step was to actually close down the foundation and put the assets into the Madison Community Foundation. And the reason we decided that, which we can elaborate on later, but the short story is we determined that we could continue to have all the flexibility that Greg mentioned through this donor advised fund, and gained several benefits as well. I mean, one was not having to file a tax return or do the backroom paperwork that had been done, and we didn't have to do a lot of that. Greg really did most of that, but still, it was a simplification. But another, and maybe the primary reason, was that we decided that we wanted to be a little bit more involved in the community with our philanthropy. And Madison Community Foundation is such a respected name in our community. And we felt that if we could keep the flexibility we had and yet join the team, if you will, that's it kind of felt like what we did, joining the team at Madison Community Foundation, that would be a win-win. We feel like we've been able to inspire some others in our community to be philanthropic. And we feel now with our connection with Madison Community Foundation that we can be even more successful in that regard.
Well, thank you for your kind words, Lau. Certainly fortunate for all of us here and for our community that you two are here and inclined as you are to help make things better. Christine, I know that you've helped many clients in this area. How can advisors best facilitate these types of conversations? And I'll follow that up with any tips for how to initiate this conversation. I hear sometimes advisors saying donors don't bring it up, and sometimes I hear donors saying advisors don't bring it up. But what have you found that works?
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me today. I think that just as Lau and Bea mentioned, their relationship with their advisor, I think, Chris Bug and Greg, they knew Lau and Bea, and they had a relationship over many years and knew their charitable nature. I think as an advisor, you need to know your client, and you need to get to know, what drives them, what is their thinking about legacy, what do they want to do. You should, being a good advisor, understand what their goals are very deeply. And so I think that provides an opportunity just quite naturally to bring that up. I know in my instance, oftentimes it's after a long relationship and seeing the charitable intent exhibited through an estate plan. It's having, frankly, children grow more in their launch. So now they know maybe there's a little more bandwidth we can direct more towards charity. It's really a discussion about legacy. That's how oftentimes I bring it up. And legacy can be different things. It can be through children. It can be also through community impact. And it's interesting to define community. It's different for every client. Is it their faith community? Is it their geographic, the Madison community, as we're speaking quite a bit about here? But it's what kind of an impact do those clients want to make? And you're right, David. I've especially over the last few years, it has been a criticism I sort of heard that advisors don't bring this up. And I think it's kind of behooves every advisor, if you're on this call, to at least raise the issue. Something happens to you, is there a charity or a cause that, will miss your current giving? A lot of people are making current gifts. Is there a charity or is there one that you want to make an impact with? And people will be direct about that, but I think oftentimes it's kind of a nice starting point, and you learn about your client, maybe things you didn't know. So I think it's an easy thing to bring up.
Great advice. I want to turn to EG now. EG, you are often associated with invaluable advice. And so I want to ask you, what are some of the big picture considerations in planning for succession?
First off, thank you for having me here today. Things that I would look at would be first clarifying the founder's intent and legacy. What impact did the foundation want to have? What values did the foundation want to embody? And then you document that story and you document the founding principles because that serves as a guidepost to all your future decisions. Then you want to look at defining, the board structure and composition. You want to have a mix of family members and outside experts because the outside experts can add, expertise in finance, law, or a specific program area, and that can be invaluable. The other things I would look at would be, engage the next generation early. Don't force feed it to them, but just help them, create, meaningful engagement opportunities. That could be through like a junior board, involving them in site visits or putting them on, specific grant making committees. This will give them a sense of ownership and prepare them for future leadership. And finally, you got to establish the governance and legal frameworks by formalizing the succession plan in the foundation's bylaws, which would set, clear roles, responsibilities, term limits, and a process for nominating, new board members. And this could avoid, future conflicts.
Excellent. Once again, great advice. Thank you all. We're going to, now that we've established kind of the why, we're going to explore the how. Families have a number of paths when transitioning a private family foundation. We'll walk through each option, highlighting the structure, some of the pros and cons, and hear some practical advisor and donor insights. We'll begin with options that retain sort of the most legal control for donors and work towards strategies that are more hands-off. So we'll start with simply keeping the foundation in place and transitioning leadership to the next generation. That sounds simple enough. And this option, when available, can preserve a family's charitable legacy and values. We also know it can present challenges if heirs are disinterested or dispersed or unprepared for governance, to your point, E.G. We'll start with Greg again, and I'd like to ask, what are the most important conversations that a family should have before inviting the next generation into leadership?
I think there's kind of two levels of conversation. And, when we are talking about the next generations, we have typically the original donors and then the children. At the original donor level, I think the question of control comes up initially before inviting the family. How much of it is you want to invite the next generation to learn how you are operating it? Versus are you inviting them to a full seat at the table right away where they will have the ability to make decisions? I think being very clear and deliberate in what the donor wants to do before extending that initial invitation really sets the stage for success in terms of how it is incorporated and implemented. And then I think the conversation with the next generation before you extend an official invitation is just really get an honest discussion about their interests at that point. In some instances, it is not anything they are overly interested or want to dedicate the time to. They may not feel that they necessarily have a right to a seat at the table. It was always the donor's money. And if those are situations, how do you overcome that or address that before there's an official involvement? Because I think once the invitation is extended or you are trying to incorporate the next generation, it's much more challenging to figure out those things on the fly. And it's much more efficient to get a clear understanding before that occurs.
Makes sense. Christine, what about digging into the details? How do you prepare heirs for taking on the specifics of governance and grant making and those responsibilities while often balancing their own careers and families?
Yeah, this is a tough one, and I think I'll kind of parrot something E.G. said in our earlier segment, which is start small and early. Start the conversation as early as you can, as early as I'll say mom and dad are comfortable with, and have them even shadow them a little bit. There are different things that work for different for different families. Some will earmark maybe a small pool. They might run a parallel, give a small pool and give some to each child or to the next gen, and have them. I've seen this done wonderfully. Have them do research and bring maybe one potential grant to the table, maybe the first year, and be able to give a presentation. I mean, that's one way to do it. But I think something that makes it manageable and gives them a very, as Greg said, clearly defined seat at the table, so they're comfortable with their parameters. Also, I think for balancing, the next gen's own career and family, a lot of times they've got so many things going on. I think it's important not to force a fit here. If someone doesn't either have the bandwidth for it, or they just maybe don't have the right frame of mind, that's just not something that's top of mind for them, don't force it. Work with them to customize a time that works for them, or maybe a different avenue logistically to participate. So I think it's just the communication is key. And I think kind of baby steps to start are a really nice way to onboard the next gen.
Makes a lot of sense. E.g., any pitfalls that you have seen when foundations transition in this way to the next generation, and advice for how advisors can help them?
So I see three pitfalls normally here. The first one is where there's a lack of a shared vision. The next generation may have different interests than the founder. And the way you can deal with that is, and Christine brought this up, is you, for example, could set up a field of interest fund, could be created for each family member, allowing them to pursue their passions within the foundation's broader envelope. The other one is, and you even see this in normal businesses, the hands-on approach, where the founder is so hands-on that the next generation just feels like they are merely just ceding to his wishes or her wishes. So what you've got to do there as an advisor is encourage the founder to mentor the next generation. And this involves just more than, passing the torch. It requires, intentional knowledge transfer, delegating decision making, and just creating opportunities for the next generation to practice and develop their own voice. And finally, the other thing is inadequate financial and operational knowledge. Then, the next generation has to understand the legal, financial, and administrative complexities that are involved in running a private foundation. So what I've seen is we've actually set up in the Goodman Foundation an orientation handbook that basically just explains everything and what it means and how to do it and so forth. So formal training will just help the next generation, become more competent and confident.
Great advice.
David, I'd like to add something to what E.G. said, that second point about, as an advisor, you really, you might be called upon to really have that discussion with the founder about letting go and mentoring. And as an advisor, I think we're uniquely positioned to maybe step in or create a platform for that discussion that doesn't happen every day. I mean, we oftentimes pull the family out of their, environs and give them a fresh table to sit at and to, really think reflectively about things. And I would just, encourage advisors to really, take advantage of that and be sensitive at all times to family dynamics, of course, but that's a really precious opportunity that you don't want to let escape if it would be helpful for the family.
And David, I would just add a quick fourth pitfall, and that's assuming that this is easy. Council on Foundations used to host a family foundation conference that when I attended, I believe 75 to 80% of the sessions was on the next generation, extending to the family and the conflicts that are happening. So it was by far the biggest topic that was being addressed.
Yeah, that's great advice. How do you get past?
David, could I add? Our view is that keeping the foundation intact for the next generation makes most sense when the next generation has a commitment to the same area where the founders are. We see what we've seen is we've been at a conference where the stakeholders in the foundation are spread all around the country, and they don't have similar interests in philanthropy. In our case, we wanted to have our philanthropy centered right here in Madison, Wisconsin, and nearby. And even though we have 8 children and 41 grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they're not centered in Madison or the greater Madison area at all. So that was a lot of the motivation for us not to follow the path of simply continuing the private foundation on to the next generation, and keep it more local by affiliating with the Madison Community Foundation.
All
Thank
the
you.
young people have their own ideas. And as all of you probably know, sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not so good. And so what Lau was saying to you is it's hard to pass that on to all the different generations that are to come after us. But somebody has to be the boss, right?
Thank you, Bea. I've certainly had some not so good ideas in my time as well. Some families prefer to sunset their foundation by spending down all of their assets within a set period or upon a triggering event. This can maximize immediate impact, but requires careful planning. It typically involves a board resolution, distributing the assets, submitting articles of dissolution, filing a final 990, among other steps. Lau and Bea, I want to go back to you and I want to ask, what questions should families ask to decide if spending down is the right plan for them?
Well, to us, I think the primary question is what gives them joy in terms of their philanthropy? How do they feel satisfaction from carrying on their philanthropy? And if it's from getting a feeling that they can make a difference for the long term, and then viewing the private foundation more like an endowment, and maybe giving the money to an endowment or various endowments. That's one way to go. In terms of Bea and myself, we recognize the great benefit from endowments for lots of organizations, but that long-term feeling that we can make a difference forever doesn't really motivate us. We get joy from making a difference right now in our philanthropy in our community, and that had a lot to do with our deciding to sunset our foundation, which in fact we did during the last year. Our foundation no longer exists. So that's one kind of sunsetting. That's not really a spending down, because really we just transferred the foundation into the Madison Community Foundation. But we are on a mission to spend down by making a difference now with the funds that were in our foundation. We don't, in a way, we kind of have a hybrid view of where our philanthropy is going. We want to be aggressive in making a difference in our community in the years we have left, but we have a structure set up whereby any money that's left, it will be invested in our community. We have through this great relationship that we have with Madison Community Foundation.
And our children know, Mama says, I know that Mother would like to have this happen, or, oh no, Lau would rather have this happen. So they all have opinions and know what we would like. And that's why I think it's great for, what do you call, pass it on down.
I'd like to ask you to a follow-up on that. And how do you design a spend down strategy that maximizes your impact and carries out your values, but that doesn't overwhelm grantees? Have you experienced that?
Well, I don't know of any organization that we're associated with that would feel overwhelmed if we gave them more money than we're giving to them now. So I don't know that that's really an issue. I think the issue might be, would we be giving money to any organization that they weren't in a position to utilize it as effectively as we would like to see within the near term? And we're definitely mindful of that. But in terms of our case, one of the things we really enjoy participating in is capital campaigns. And of course, capital campaigns, which go on regularly in the Madison area, need very large amounts of money. And I don't know any capital campaign that has felt overwhelmed by donations by us or anybody else. And we plan to be aggressive in that regard. But just the other point is that we have, to me, a spend down needs to be a longer term program, not something you say, okay, all of a sudden we want to spend down now. We have been building up our level of contributions to the 60 organizations that we support right now. And that is something we plan to continue in a way that will gradually spend down what we have, but will help the capacity of these organizations without having so much money that it won't be utilized in a way that we would like to see.
Such a thoughtful approach. E.G., I wanted to ask, how can advisors balance family goals, community needs, and estate and tax considerations in a spend down plan?
So before I get to that, David, can I add to what Lau and B said there?
Please do.
It also works from the reverse side. You want to give the organizations that you are providing grants to sufficient time to be able to replace the funds that you're no longer going to be providing to them once you've completed your spend down. So during that period of the spend down period, you want to work with those organizations to find a way to replace funds, build up their capacity in order to do that, so that all of a sudden that money is gone, and that may affect their ability to be in existence. So I would say it's giving them enough time to plan for the replacement of the funds that are no longer going to be there.
Excellent.
Now back to your other question here. Way advisors can help there is, first off, strategic planning and timeline management. First off, your spend down timeline's got to be realistic. You got to balance that with your desire to have impact immediately with the need for a thoughtful strategy. And you've got to be able to model your finances to ensure the funds are distributed efficiently during that spend down period. The other thing is you have to facilitate family consensus. A spend down can be emotional. And the advisor can help facilitate family discussions, keeping the family aligned on a mission, timeline, and a grant making process, and it ensures that all the family members are heard and are committed to the final plan. And then you've always got to integrate your tax and estate planning, and the advisor can help you there, because the spend down is going to affect the family's broader financial and estate strategies.
Excellent. Thank you, E.G. We're going to transition to another succession option. We won't spend a lot of time here. It's not that common, but we want to talk about supporting organizations, and for families who want less involvement than a private family foundation, but still more legal control than a donor advised fund, which we'll talk about next, provides. A supporting organization can be an option. It retains board governance. It can align with the mission, while offering the tax advantages of a public charity. The trade-off can be added complexity and regulatory oversight. I want to ask Christine, what are supporting organizations, first off, and how do they work, and what degree of governance and control can families realistically expect?
Sure. Well, to the relief of everyone, I will be brief on this because I think this is not something we do see much, but it's sort of a middle ground between a public charity and a private foundation. So I think it's important to address this. There are basically three types, and they're I guess creatively called type 1, type 2, and type 3, but I think about them as different. Type 1, which really is it supports a public charity. At type 1, it is a public charity. And I think of this as sort of a parent subsidiary or parent-child relationship. The child is the supporting org. It supports the parent. It is the public charity controls the board. They manage things. It's just like it sounds. It's supporting its public charity. The type 2 is sort of a middle ground. I think of this as the sibling type, where you're under the you're controlled and connected with the public charity, but you're not under that direct control. So it's a little bit freer. There's a little less. I mean, the public charity has to have majority of the board, but there's, less. It's a little more tenuous. And then finally, the type 3, I think it's it can be very loose connection. And with a caution, sometimes type 3s can be taxed as private foundations. So that's very facts and circumstances. It's one I tend to lean away from. But those are the types. And I think, like you said, it gives a family, the advantage would be that a supporting org gives the family, it's sort of the control like you have at a private foundation. It gives you a board, it gives you structure, it gives you that separate entity that you might crave. I will say particularly business owners, they're used to that formalization, they're used to the structure. It gives them the ability to act still in that structure, but yet still qualify as a public charity. Unlike the donor advised fund, which I think is now becoming much more common. It doesn't have necessarily that formality, although as we might talk about, you can build it around a donor advised fund as well. So I should have been a little more brief. Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you. We have a couple of type 1s at the Community Foundation. It's not a common tool, but can be the right fit for people. What we do have a lot of are donor advised funds, so we'll transition to that topic. Some families choose to transition their private foundation to a donor advised fund, gaining simplicity, reducing costs, while still maintaining involvement on the grant making part of it. This can be facilitated through national sponsors like Fidelity Charitable, community foundations, and even charities such as the University of Wisconsin Foundation. They can help you set up a donor advised fund. The trade-offs can include less direct control over the operations and the investments. E.G., I want to start with you and ask, what are donor advised funds and how can they support a family's philanthropy?
So a donor advised fund is a separate fund or account, and it's managed by a public charity known as a sponsoring organization. As David just mentioned, that can be a community foundation, Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab, and the donor will make a tax-deductible contribution to the donor advised fund, and then at their leisure, then just recommend grants from the fund to, qualified public charities. That's the key word there, though, recommends. The final say is with the sponsoring organization on the approval of any recommended grants. So how does donor advised funds support philanthropy? They're easy to set up. I mean, there's simplicity there. There's minimal administrative burden, and the sponsoring organization pretty much handles the whole back office for you. They also can give you information about the particular charities that you may be interested. They're very efficient from a tax perspective because you get an immediate tax deduction when you make the contribution to the fund, regardless of when you're going to recommend the grants. So this will allow you to lump sum donations to maximize tax benefits, either in a high income year or under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act provisions. Bunching is coming back because of the way they've dealt with limitations on charitable contributions with floors and reductions if you're in the 37% bracket. The other thing is donor advised funds are flexible. I mean, you can give cash, you can give publicly traded securities, etc. And once you make that donation into the donor advised fund, if you're not paying it out, it can grow based upon how you have it invested, which will allow you to make even more or recommend even more grants out of the fund.
Thank you, E.G. You're a great spokesperson for these things. We're going to be hiring on our donor engagement team in a couple of weeks. So if you're interested.
That would be very short term at my age.
Christine, I want to ask, what factors weigh most heavily when deciding whether a donor advised fund, people refer to them as DAFs, is the right successor structure?
Well, the right factors, a lot of it comes to timing. As E.G. kind of hinted, these you can make a contribution, open it up very quickly, very easily. So I think oftentimes the client might have a sale of a business that's been brewing for a while, and it seems like, they had some intent to create something, a charitable piece in that same calendar year, and suddenly, we're in December and nothing has happened. It's just a very simple way. Oftentimes that'll drive it, put it in the DAF. It's easy to set up and create. Other things again, e.g., you got to remember that supporting the supporting platform, they actually make the grants. You have to be comfortable that, now knock on wood, I've never had a client, to my knowledge, request a grant and have it not given. I'd be curious if anyone has, but it's a risk you always had to advise clients of. They're making a recommendation. You assume it will be handled very efficiently. These platforms tend to run very smoothly. So I guess as long as the client is well aware that is a risk, then that's one of the factors they should consider. But by and large, this is a much simpler organization or way to manage charitable giving rather than a private foundation, and you don't have a lot of the compliance headaches. So it's becoming a winning solution for a lot of people.
Excellent.
David, I would add that when we were working with clients and evaluating the options, most of the private foundations that we work with, the donor advised fund was the second choice. And this was many years ago. And donor advised funds have evolved pretty significantly in terms of what they can do with investments, some of the freedom of distributions, and even identity. And so I would say the bar for choosing a private foundation has been raised over the last 15, 20 years because donor advised funds have done a good job of incorporating some of the advantages that the private foundation used to have uniquely in their corner.
Greg, you mentioned investments. I want to dig deeper on that one and just ask, what should advisors know about investment management, especially if the family wishes to retain their asset manager?
And that, donor advised funds used to be a fairly limited set of investment options, primarily mutual funds. And I feel as they have grown in size and scope and experience, they have opened the doors to we can work with donors to accommodate a heavier stock allocation, or we want to incorporate individual stock management or work with an existing advisor. Those were options that were not available 15, 20 years ago that you're seeing a lot more progress within the donor advised fund space recently.
Excellent. Yeah, different sponsoring organizations have different programs in place. The Community Foundation recently introduced one, thanks to Lau Bea here, that allows the opportunity for advisors to apply and be approved as asset managers. And so we are excited to launch that. I want to ask Lau Bea, you did convert your private family foundation to a donor advised fund, and I want to shift a little bit and just talk about how can you to maintain your sense of legacy and involvement going from the foundation to a donor advised fund, and maybe a follow-up would be, what differences have you noticed so far? And I know we're early into this.
Well, the possibility for continued high-level involvement was key in our decision to affiliate with the Madison Community Foundation. And in our discussions with you, David, the key fact that you brought forth was that over all its years in existence, the Madison Community Foundation has never failed to follow a recommendation of a donor advisor as long as the recommendation was to a legitimate 50c3 charity. And that was persuasive to us. So we took it on a matter of faith that we, in fact, could continue to have as much involvement in the investment of our funds in the community through the donor advised funds as we did with the private foundation. And so far, knock on wood, we haven't experienced any reason to doubt that, and we're very happy. It is very straightforward to make our recommendations, which are honored, and the funds distributed very quickly, and it really simplifies that part of our life. So we've been very happy with that. In terms of legacy in the community, we don't see any difference in terms of the funds coming from the Lau Bea Christensen Charitable Fund at Madison Community Foundation versus them coming from the Lau Bea Christensen Charitable Foundation. So we've been very happy with the transition, and we're going forward on that basis.
Thank you. I want to shift to a related topic, and this is creating a designated or a field of interest fund, another transition option for private family foundation families who want to preserve donor intent, but simplify the structure even further, may work with a community foundation or a sponsoring organization to create a designated fund or a field of interest fund to support a broader cause. These options secure long-term impact and ensure a family giving legacy with even less ongoing involvement. Greg, I want to turn to you and ask, what is a designated or a field of interest fund?
Yeah, a designated fund is where you are choosing to support a specific charity. There's still some flexibility in terms of the timing or some ongoing conversation about what would be supported in that charity before the funds are dispersed. And that's pretty much what distinguishes it from an outright gift, at termination or a death. But you are going to be having the funds going to that specific charity. Field of interest fund allows you to, in more broad terms, say these are the causes that are most important to me. Could be environment, could be education, could be health, but you task someone with deciding when and how to distribute the funds as long as though they are going to support that broad cause. So it's a way to loosely extend your legacy without having the direct involvement, either because you are no longer interested in doing it or you are no longer around to exert that level of control.
Thank you, Greg. We see a lot of those here. You can continue to be recognized in the name of the fund. You could create the Rademacher Fund for your Overture Center or whatever your favorite cause is, or for Fund for the Arts, which then leaves the grant making up to the sponsoring organization. Well, thank you. Lau Bea, did you consider this option and or as part of the transition? When might this be a good option for a family's legacy?
We have not considered that. Where we see this would be applicable is if the donors had interests that could be considered more narrow than our interests, and they would want to play that up. We in fact have derived a lot of satisfaction out of hearing from people in the community that we made a difference by being lead donors in various organizations and various capital campaigns, and that gave a satisfaction to us. In terms of field of interest, I could see a family that had a particular field of interest that they wanted to make sure was recognized and they could be leaders and perhaps influence others in the community to maybe join them and support that field of interest more strongly than they would otherwise. And also, it's a way to limit discretion of, say, by the successive donor advisor, who might not be quite as interested in the areas of interest. But with the field of interest fund, that there would be perhaps more control from the original donor than would be otherwise the case.
Thank you. Very helpful. E.G., I was wondering if you would share, your thoughts on how these types of funds balance donor intent with future community needs. And I'm thinking really of you can speak to both.
Sure. So as Greg said, for the designated fund, I mean, that option, the donor has complete control over who receives the funds, and the donor's intent is paramount. The balance comes in because comes from the community foundation's promise to find a similar charity if the original designated charity ceases to exist. So that would ensure that the original purpose of the fund was still being upheld. Now, with the field of interest, the balance comes in because the donor's general intent is honored. They want to support a specific cause, but they entrust the community foundation to determine how the funds can be used, most effectively as needs and opportunities change over time. So this approach just ensures that the funding remains relevant and impactful for the whole future.
Excellent. Christine, any guidance that you would give advisors or that advisors can give to ensure chosen causes remain relevant over time? Anything to add on that?
Yeah, just briefly, you keep things flexible. Don't be too restrictive. The donor on the front end. You might today say, I want to benefit, kids graduating from Bell Phillips Memorial High School, going into environmental science at UW. Let's broaden that. What's your intent? Benefiting a rising student from the west side of Madison, maybe going to environmental field somewhere else. Just try to craft it with more intentional language and less specifics that are going to tie the hands of ultimately the recipients. And we've seen them in some instances where they're so specific that there's no one that fits the mold at all, and we have funds that sit there and go unspent. So it's really important, if you're taking the long view, use a lot of intentional language and keep it flexible and broad.
That's great advice. We use with preference for on many of our scholarships, just to ensure they're given out.
Yep.
Excellent. So another option is to just merge with another charitable organization to transfer the assets to a like-minded foundation or nonprofit. This can extend the impact and relieve administration, but may mean giving up the family's independent giving identity. I want to ask E.G., as you have managed a family foundation, how should families evaluate whether a charity is the right fit to carry forward their philanthropic intent, and what are best practices to ensure the family's story and values aren't lost in the merger?
So the most important consideration is whether the potential partner's mission is truly aligned with your original philanthropic intent. You got to look at their programs, their grant-making history, and their culture. You also have to look at whether or not the organization can effectively manage the transfer assets. Do they have the staff, the expertise, and the systems just to continue the family's grant making with the same care and due diligence? And as for preserving the legacy, I would say formalize a legacy agreement that would include specific provisions in the merger agreement about how the family's legacy will be honored. This could include, naming a specific fund in their name, establishing a named grant-making committee with family members, or maybe creating an endowed fund to support, a specific field of interest into the future. I'm big into creating living legacy documents. So it's not just a legal document, but it's a legacy book. It's a narrative that tells the story of the foundation and its impact. This could be, include stories, photos, and testimonials from grantees. And you'd share this with the new organization's board and staff so they have an idea of your history and your values. And then I would maintain an ongoing relationship with them, participate in their grant-making cycles, attend their events. This just ensures that the personal story and values just remain a living part of the new organization's work. Stay involved.
Excellent. This last approach has been touched on a few times, which is really just a hybrid. None of these options that we've described are mutually exclusive, especially if you have differing family ideas about different values and different goals. You can blend these. You can do a partial payout, a donor advised fund, or any mixture of things to preserve family legacy and to help meet the needs of the next generation. So we won't spend more time on that one unless anyone has anything to add on kind of a hybrid approach that they've seen or pitfalls. I think what we'll do in our remaining couple of minutes is I'm going to ask Allison Helland, who's tuned in here. Are there any questions in the Q&A? that the group can address?
Yes, there's a couple of questions for the group. I think this first one is really interesting, and it's probably geared a bit more towards the advisors on the panel. But as you're working with family foundations that are transitioning from that first generation that may have more, that may be closer to the operations and the day-to-day requirements of running the foundation, to that next generation who may be a bit more detached, are there resources, or do you have conversations with them about bringing in other staff to kind of supplement the knowledge that they might have in order to get them up to speed on really how to run the foundation?
I don't say generally, yes, embrace the advisor team, get the advisor team. And I use this, across the board, accounting, legal, and investment, and make introductions, maybe have an educational session. I've seen that done very successfully, and have it, even say, take a retreat or something that's a way where the family can be together, meet with the advisors, and really dig in and tighten the embrace with the advisors.
I would say in the experience I've had with private foundations, the donors really do focus more on the giving side of it. And even if they don't have professional or official staff, the advisor team, from the accountant to the attorneys to the financial advisors, handle an awful lot of the behind the scenes. There hasn't been a lot of, the private foundation has a lot of administrative overhead, and there's not a lot of interest in spending your time dealing with that. So I haven't seen the family members do a lot of that directly, or have interest in passing it on to the next generation for them to take care of that piece.
And I've also brought in, family members from other private foundations that have already gone through this process to discuss lessons learned, what they would have done differently, what worked, what didn't work. I mean, each private foundation is different because it's based upon your mission, but at a high level, you can talk about, okay, we would have done this different, but what this really worked, and so forth. So that was a big help.
Well, thank you. Allison, any other questions to address? Maybe a short one?
So there's just one more to throw out, and unfortunately, none of these are very, I think, have very short answers. But obviously, we've heard a lot about nonprofits and nonprofit status in the news lately, and there's kind of an evolving discussion around nonprofits and private foundations. Have these recent discussions or events at all changed the way you advise clients on whether to establish a private foundation or support a 501c3, either through a DAF or directly to the organization?
I have some clients who give routinely to their alma maters, and if the foundations and endowments for those schools, particularly on the East Coast, are being impacted, they're just watching very carefully, and they're staying in close contact with the development offices of those endowments. Good question.
Excellent. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your expertise and experience here. And thank you to everyone for joining us. We are so grateful to be involved in these types of conversations and to work with you all, donors, nonprofits, and advisors, to help identify charitable solutions that are best fit for families and make our communities stronger. We are here as a resource. If you'd like to continue the conversation, don't hesitate to reach out. Please watch for the email survey. We really value your feedback. Thank you again to everyone here, and be well and enjoy this beautiful fall day. Thanks.